Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today I'm reviewing the newest expansion for Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, or expansions is probably the more accurate term. This is going to be Discovery, Foundations, and Crisis. 3 expansions in one box, although to be very clear, this is a prototype review, this is prototype components, all that stuff. This is a Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition box with some taped on stuff on top of it, but it also means I don't actually know how it's going to be packaged or sold. I'll talk about the various expansions, what's in them, how they modified the game experience, how they changed my perception of the game, and then we'll just take it from there, I guess. But anyways, Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition is the card version of, well, Terraforming Mars. It's a game that when it first arrived, I had somewhat disappointed reactions to it because I love Terraforming Mars. It's my favorite game of all time, and Ares Expedition wasn't Terraforming Mars for me. And it still isn't, to be clear, but it's certainly something that over time, it has grown on me more and more. It is both a game that is one of my favorite games, while also being a game that was a disappointment for me because it wasn't Terraforming Mars. Where it did shine is it is faster, it has a degree of accessibility that Terraforming Mars does not, and for me it did become my go-to version of solo gaming for Terraforming Mars. Whenever I'm playing it solo, I tend to dive into this one over Terraforming Mars, and when I'm playing multiplayer, I tend to dive into Terraforming Mars, unless of course I want a slightly shorter, not significantly shorter experience. That's a bit of background on where I am with Ares Expedition, in case you're wondering. And for context, it's a game I rate a 4 to 5. I really enjoy it, it's solid, but also it's not my favorite game of all time, like its big brother is. But that brings us to, well, Ares Expedition, Discoveries, Foundations, and Crisis. 3 expansions that change up the game in 2 small ways and 1 absolutely huge, mind-blowing, crazy way that I probably titled this video something along the lines of Terraforming Mars Goes Cooperative. Because that's a huge, huge change. But let's start with the other 2 first, and then we'll dive into the Crisis expansion, which totally changes up the entire game experience. Starting off with, let's go with Discovery, the first one in the box. Discovery is going to add 4 things to the game, technically really 3 things, but effectively it adds these wild tokens over here, a pool of wild tokens that when matched up with wild tags, which I may or may not find one over here, but there are wild tags in the game now, little question marks on tags, that when you play a card with a question mark on it, which I can't find, to be fair, this is a very large stack of cards, but whenever you have a tag, a question mark tag on a card, you can play it and define the tag of the card as you go through it. So it gives you a degree of just, you know, a little variability to the tags or the cards in the game. It does come, speaking of which, with a host of new cards, some new corporations, some things like that, that will add more variability to your experience. It also, and arguably more importantly, it adds these cards over these phases and milestones, not phases, milestones and awards to the game. That's going to be something that if you've played the original Terraforming Mars, you're familiar with the concept. It's slightly different in the way it's implemented here, just because it's a different game, but the concept is the same. You have milestones and awards. Milestones any player can get if they are the first player, or in the same round, because of the nature of the way this game works, if you hit it in the same phase, the same round, if you achieve one of these milestones over here, then you'll get the associated points. If you have 6 blue cards, 8 green cards, 12 cards in a tableau, or any of the other various options on the table. So it gives you something to drive for. One of the things that I liked about the original game, and I like its addition over here, although we're drifting into opinion part, we'll get to that soon. We also have awards. Awards over here, which are again 3 things you'll throw into the game that give you points at the end of the game if you have achieved certain things. The most resources on cards, the most upgraded phase cards, which is a good segue into what are upgraded phase cards. You see, the 4th thing it adds, so it adds again tags, it adds milestones, it adds awards. The 4th thing that Discovery adds to your game is going to be upgraded phase cards, which is arguably the biggest thing in the game. You see, Ares Expedition as a concept relies on phases. You're going to be playing phases of cards. You're going to be cards that dictate the phases, dictate what happens. Are you producing? Are you drawing cards? Are you building green development cards? Are you playing events? Different things like that, depending on the phase you play. And then if you play the phase card, you also get an associated bonus for playing that phase. While all players can engage in the phase, you get the bonus for it. It's a typical structure we see in a lot of games, and this just implements it into the Terraforming Mars universe. But now we have upgraded phase cards, a variety of phase cards where you can upgrade your cards into something more powerful than what you started with. You can take your basic green development card over here that says each player may play a green card this round. Very helpful. But when you get this card, you pay 3 MC less for that card that you play if you're the one who played this phase card. Now, various things in the game, from starting corporations to cards in the game, will give you the opportunity to upgrade these phase cards. You can take that development card and turn it instead into either one of these. Okay, it's not a procedural path. It's not like level 2, level 3. It's just a question of which one you prefer, which one will suit your playstyle or current game state at the moment. We have this one over here, where instead of getting 3 MC less credit, you can reduce the cost of the card you play this phase by 6 MC. So it doubles the discount you're getting, which can be very helpful if you're going heavy on green cards. Or alternatively, if you're going heavy on green cards, you can do this one. Reduce the cost of the first card you play by 3 MC, but you can play an additional green card with a cost of 12 MC or less. So you don't get a higher discount, but you do get the flexibility to get green cards into play faster, albeit cheaper green cards. And so you do have the flexibility, which basically means you can upgrade your development card into a stronger phase card. And that can be true for all of the phases in the game. Each one has 2 phase upgrades, which basically means you have 10 phase upgrade cards per player, different ways of augmenting what your benefits are, drawing more cards, having more production, having a variety of benefits, taking extra actions, repeat another action again, different things you can do in the game, different ways you can upgrade and develop your own asymmetric bonuses. I mean, the entire game is developed asymmetry, but you can have an additional way of getting that developed asymmetry in the game, which goes back to this award over here, which have the most upgraded phase cards at the end of the game. And that's the 4 things that Discovery adds, which means it's time to move into Foundations. Foundations I find to be less of a major game shift, although it depends on who you are. You see, the first thing Foundations adds is something that I likely will never personally use. Again, drifting into opinions. The first thing it adds is it adds a 5 and 6 player count, which means it adds, well, 5th and 6th player components. It adds all the phase cards you'll need in case you have both expansions over there, and it adds all that, which is great if you want to play this game with 5 and 6 players. Now, regular Terraforming Mars, I will never play with 5 and 6. I'm even reluctant to play it with 4, but in terms of Ares Expedition, because of the nature of the gameplay, it's not nearly as bad. In fact, it's entirely possible that I will actually take the opportunity to pull this out at higher player counts for people who all know the game, who like the game, and we want to dive into the experience, because I don't think it would be that long. That said, I just don't know if it'll ever happen, because I tend to not have that large of a game group, and I don't know if I'll ever have 5 or 6 people where Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition is the gameplay of choice. But for you, that might be incredibly helpful. The other things it adds is it adds a new score track over here. Again, something that I don't particularly love, very much strongly noting again, prototype. Everything you see here is prototype, including this flimsy board, and I don't know how the final implementation will be, but this is a larger track. As you play this game, you're going to have your tokens on this track, which means as you start off, until you start diversifying more, you often can very much be in lockstep with other players, which means this is a game where I typically have the same people, or you'll have 2 or 3 people on the same exact spot. This gives you a little bit more room to have a little bit of flexibility where you put it. It just gives you a starting score track. It's a nice quality of life thing. I don't know if I'll bother using it, but I mean, it's nice to have. It also adds, most importantly, I think, and it adds some cards and corporations, things like that, but it also adds a 4th terraforming metric, a 4th terraforming metric of architecture. You're going to have this new architecture track, which is a new thing you have to terraform as you play through the game, and there's going to be new cards that have it as a requirement, that modify it, that give you different rewards. It's just another thing that's added into the game. We'll get. I have a hard time saying things without drifting into opinions. We'll get to the opinions shortly, but it adds a new architecture metric to the experience, so that's another more stuff for the game. We'll drift into the opinion part of it shortly, but that's basically what Foundation adds. Some quality of life things, some more player count options, and then the new architecture metric. And then we have Crisis. Crisis is going to drastically change up your game, but I think given the nature of where we are, I think I will segue this review into 2 parts. I will talk about my opinion of Discovery and Foundations, and then we'll talk about Crisis totally separately, because it is totally game-changing. So, let's talk about my opinion over here. We have a 5 and 6 player expansion. Like I said already, it's nice to have. I don't know if I'll personally ever use it. It's entirely like, if I had to make a guess, I'd say there's a 20% chance I ever use the 5 and 6 player expansion. But that's a personal thing based on me, based on my game group, so it's okay, but I don't really care. This one over here, I almost wish they had a new board entirely. I acknowledge the need for a larger track, but I don't know if I'm going to use a track that kind of sits to the side and duplicates the exact same information. So it's nice, but if this is the final implementation of it, I just don't see myself, practically speaking, pulling it out. I think it would be almost more confusing to have duplicated information off to the side. So I get what it's going for. I understand the need for it. I just don't think the solution is as elegant as I personally would be looking for. Again, prototype, all of that. As far as the foundations, architecture, as far as the architect terraforming metric over there, I like it without loving it. I like the extra cards, the way it implements and adds to the game. It's something that I don't see myself not playing with. I like extra cards and variety. I like having more stuff in that giant deck full of cards over there, and so I likely will use it. Although I will say I do wish there was a slightly higher count of cards that use that metric. I find that the number of cards proportionate to the stack of cards, especially if you're combining other expansions, means there's not enough architecture implementation. Now, there's obviously, not obviously, but there are ways you can improve the architecture of the game with standard actions, so you're never crippled by not having those cards come out, and they do come out, to be very clear, but I wish there was a little bit more tie into the architecture stuff, just a higher volume of cards. You know, I think there's like 35 cards, maybe make it 50 cards or something. That would be ideal, although it's a Kickstarter, and so that does mean that there likely will be various cards, so maybe it will be 50. I don't know what the final count will be. But overall, I like it. I just wish there were a few more cards so it came up a bit more, so it was relevant a bit more often. But that's as far as the architecture. So that covers everything we have in Foundations. It's good. I like it. No major mind-blown aspect, but good stuff all around. From there we have Discovery. Discovery is already a step upwards for me in terms of what it adds. I already like milestones and awards. In fact, in a video I did a while ago where I talked about my experience and my journey with Ares Expeditions, from being slightly disappointed to keeping it and really enjoying it and playing it a decent amount. One of the things I did include is I do have house rules when I play the game. A variety of house rules, and one of those house rules was a whole stack of homemade cards that I use for the various foundations and awards, again, because I like that customized mindset. I like that aspect of every time I play, there's a slightly different combination of things to consider as you dive into the experience. Having actual components that have them, and again, by the way, prototype, this is not the final shape or look of your tiles, but I like having those. I'm happy to have them. I'm happy to throw out my little custom cut sheets of paper that I never bothered to make anything fancier, and so I like these. I already wanted them in the game, and I'm happy to see them here. These tokens over here that you add, the wild tags, again, similar to architecture, I'll always use them. I don't see a reason not to. It's not worth not using them, and it adds to the game, while not drastically improving my general opinion of the game either. It's nice to have, it's more stuff, and I like the more cards, all those things are good. My favorite part about the Discovery expansion is going to be those upgraded phase cards. Those upgraded phase cards are a huge thing in the game. Slowly building out a set of cards in the game, slowly building out a set of things that you are better at. You're better at production and you're better at development, or those two things, or research, whatever it is. Finding those competitive advantages and upgrading those phase cards and taking advantage of them as often as possible. You want a minimum of 2, because you can't repeat the same phase every turn, and then you can slowly start looking at other players and relying on them to play other phases. If I know that you've upgraded your action card, I can expect to see actions coming from you a bit more. So it both gives me a bit more reliability around how other players will play their game, meaning I'm actually focusing a bit more on what you're doing, but also it means that I get to pursue my own competitive advantages, which although helps them because they can plan around that as well. But I like those cards. I like what it adds to the game. It's definitely a nice thing to have in that is more than just a, hey, I like it, it's okay, or whatever, but I really like those upgraded phase cards, and that easily is an extra nice thing in the game. And that's overall, I guess, should I do a review of this, a score, a rating? I don't even know how to structure this. 3 different expansions in a single video. I will say Ares Expedition is a 4 for me, and I would say that the Discovery and Foundations modules likely don't elevate it to the next level. It improves it. I'm happy with additional content. I'm happy with additional modules. I have no real complaints. The only complaint I would have is if you're someone who wants to take things in and out every game. I mean, if you're playing with architecture some games and not others, that can be slightly irritating because you'll have to take the cards out or ignore them when they come up. Maybe, sure, but for me, I'm just going to keep them in the game, and I'm always going to teach new players with them. It's not a lot of extra stuff, and so it's all around a solid plus, although I think it would still leave my rating for Ares Expedition at a 4 with those. Nice things, but not game-breaking or amazingly changing my experience or opinion of the game. Although, again, I'm somewhat biased because some of the things that they added are things I've already been playing with my own house rule versions of, so you take that into account as well. Which brings us to Crisis. Crisis, which almost deserves its own video, and in hindsight, with the way I'm structuring this video, I kind of wish I had done its own video, but it's too late now. I'm locked in, I'm committed. Let's go ahead and talk about Crisis. Crisis is game-breaking. It totally changes the Terraforming Mars experience because Crisis is a cooperative expansion. Now, to be very clear, it's a cooperative expansion that you could play solo at the same time. Let's go ahead and grab some of the Crisis components that I've intentionally left off to the side. But Crisis is going to completely change the experience you're playing. You could play it solo, and I don't think that I will ever. It could be wrong here. I might be wrong here. So statistically speaking, over time, I'm wrong here. So let's not say ever. Let's use the word majority. A majority of my future plays of either Terraforming Mars solo or Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition solo will be replaced by me playing Crisis as a solo experience. A majority, an absolute majority. My biggest critique is the lack of pure 100% integration with some of the other expansions, although I am curious to see how that's done because, again, prototype for the 14th time. Crisis changes the whole entire game, and it changes it in a way that is dynamic and a good thing, and I significantly enjoyed this experience compared to playing Terraforming Mars solo, which is usually can you terraform Mars properly in time within X number of rounds and with some degree of modularity. Again, I like Terraforming Mars solo, I like Ares Expedition solo more, and I like Crisis solo the most. Crisis totally changes that, but it also gives you the opportunity to play Terraforming Mars cooperatively, which I've done so multiple times now, and am really enjoying that experience. It totally changes the way you approach the game, and it lets you build things together in a way that feels cooperative, not because it feels cooperative, but because it is cooperative. You're now working together. It's the first time I've ever played Terraforming Mars where I am sitting there intentionally trying to figure out how we can cooperate in a way that will make us win together. It totally changes the experience, and it does so while giving you giving me a good experience at the same time. It's not a compromise in the experience that feels like it shouldn't exist. It is an enjoyable way to play Terraforming Mars that I am eager to continue to dive into, that I'm eager to continue to see what it does for the experience. I'm very much drifting heavily into opinion over anything else here. The worst part about Crisis, like I said already, is the fact that it doesn't integrate perfectly with everything else, at least not right now. Prototype for the 15th time. So let's talk about Crisis ads, because I have to kind of halfway set this up while we go through it. But the idea of Crisis is it takes place after you've already terraformed Mars. It takes place after you have already sat there, you've built up all your metrics, you have some tokens that I've already lost, where are they, over here, and you are already at the top of your field in all senses. All the oceans have been turned over, the oxygen and the heat have already been at max, and now bad things start happening to the game. And those bad things are going to be laid out by this Crisis step one at a time as you go through the experience. So let's go ahead and just set this up, and then walk you through the way Crisis plays. So, Crisis step. The first thing we do is we put detriment tokens into play based on the metrics. Great, doesn't mean anything to you, and that makes sense, we'll come back to that. Then we resolve the persistent effects of all Crisis cards on play. Again, not relevant. Draw a card from the Crisis deck and resolve any immediate effects. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And these are divided up into various player counts in terms of having different card sets for different players. I'm not going to focus on that right now because I just want to show you how to play, so I'm just going to draw a card, and we're going to go ahead and draw this card. Immediately, decrease the oxygen one step. Every Crisis card has an immediate effect on it, which will get worse as the game progresses. But let's start off with the basic one. Decrease the oxygen one step. Oxygen has just lowered. Not a big deal. We can take care of that. We can play cards. We can build up our engine, and you will have to start from scratch building up your engine. Then the goal is play a blue card to remove a counter. Okay? So every time we play a blue card, we will remove a counter from this card. The problem is, this card comes into play with 4 Crisis counters on it, which means collectively between the players, and this card is for, I believe, a 3-player game. A 3-player game, collectively between the players, 4 blue cards have to be played, and if they are not removed in time, every single Crisis step, the second thing we do, is we resolve the persistent effects of all Crisis cards in play, which would flip over an ocean and lower heat. So if this card was here already, we would already have moved this down 1 and flipped over an ocean tile of our choice that we would have to then rebuild or put ocean on the board as we have these issues hitting us. And so these Crisis cards will slowly pile up. As you hit certain thresholds in these metrics, you're going to add these detriment tokens in play. These are the detriment tokens referenced in step A. As you lower into yellow or red, you will start adding those tokens in play, and if you're ever in purple in that first step, well, then you lose the game. Or if you ever get to the bottom of the track and have to move further down, then you also immediately lose the game instead of doing the check step. That's me, the Crisis cards. They're going to be over here. You go through the Crisis step where you're going to, again, lower the cards, go through all the sequence there, dealing with the detriment tokens, dealing with existing cards, playing another new card, doing whatever terrible, horrible, bad thing it does. Each player randomly reveals a phase card from the hand. They cannot choose that phase card this round. Put another 4 tokens over here, and this time you have to play development cards, 4 development cards to get that rid of, or else you're losing oxygen and more oceans every single round. Then we go to the planning step, and the planning step we're going to go ahead and discuss and try to figure out how we want to orchestrate who gets what bonus, who plays what planning phase, and there is a factor here in terms of if you're playing it solo, if you're playing with fewer players, you'll have another deck that you can utilize to make sure the game is balanced around that, so you do have these other aspects going in. Then you go ahead to resolve the phases. And finally, in the end step, you can spend victory points to remove counters from events in play. Basically, there are some modifications, there are some changes to the gameplay to account for the fact that this game is not designed as a solo game or as a cooperative experience, and now you have to change or pivot around that. So, for example, many cards in the game give you victory points. Whenever you earn victory points, you instead take your associated tree chips over here, and those count as victory points. So if you ever earn a victory point on a card, you'll take this over here, and you can spend them to remove Crisis effects. That keeps the balance of the game in play. That card that costs an extra 10 mega credits or MC is going to instead give you a victory point that you don't care about. Well, now you can use that victory point to remove Crisis tokens. So the game is slightly rebalanced, some slight changes to the rules to make sure that the game stays in play. You're going to rinse and repeat, effectively going until you hit a certain number card over here when you hit your phase 4 card, and at that point you need to basically get the Mars back up to full strength before the end of the game, and then you win. And if you don't, you lose and die a horrible death. Or multiple times along the way, if you check doing the starting step and you're in purple, you lose and die a horrible death. If you alternatively are already at purple and you have to go further down, you lose and die a horrible death. But you are working together to try to ensure that you can recover Mars from whatever horrible problems are happening to it, and that is the Crisis expansion for Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. Which brings me to my second review, all bundled in one video. I love the Crisis expansion. Not without nitpicks, to be very clear, but I love the Crisis expansion. The Crisis expansion is a ton of fun. It is challenging, it is hard. I have played it solo, I have played it with 2 and 3 players. I have dove into this multiple times, and it is frequently hard. And there is difficulty modulation around it. I've lost 2 out of my 3 experiences so far, and in those games, I've lost 2 out of my 3 experiences, and in those games, I've always gone in with the regular rules. There are ways to make it harder, there are ways to make it easier. There are extra cards you can add to it over here, but all of that is just, these are extra cards. They'll give you a little bit of build-up phase if you want them. But I will say is it has definitely hit my criteria. My number 1 criteria for any cooperative experience is that when I lose, I want to feel like I could have won. And when I win, I want to feel like I could have lost. The games I've lost at Terraforming Mars, the first time I dove into it, of Crisis, the first time I dove into it, I lost brutally, and I don't know if I could say that I think I would have won. I think I just lost brutally. My second experience, I dove into it and managed to win successfully. But I totally thought, that I was 100% going to lose. And then I dove into it again and lost again, but this time it came very close. It came to the cusp of things, and it felt like had I played a bit better, had we played a bit better, we would have had a chance to actually survive. I really am enjoying the Crisis expansion. It does things very well. It gives me the Terraforming Mars experience. It gives me in a cooperative sense. It gives me with a new sense of challenge and puzzle that is different than your standard solo gameplay that you would have of Terraforming Mars, or even of Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. I really enjoy everything it throws at me, with the one caveat and complaint, 2 caveats and complaints. The 2 negatives I will give about the Crisis expansion is that, first of all, like I said already, it doesn't play well with others, at least not right now. Many other factors in terms of other expansion, other content, doesn't necessarily seamlessly integrate with Crisis, and so that does mean you might have to do things like pulling cards out of your decks, or just ignoring them when they come up and hoping you catch them. Oh, this is an architecture card, we're not playing with architecture. So you do have that aspect of, I kind of wish it did have ways that it played well with others. That might be something we see, I don't know yet, but for me right now, that is the first thing I'll give against it. The second thing is something that was more of a problem after my first game, but has become less of a problem as I played, although it's definitely worth addressing, which is because of the nature of this being a competitive game that is being co-opted into a cooperative game, I find that some aspects aren't as smooth or streamlined as I would like. You have things like cards that have points in them, and now you're getting tree tokens for those cards. Whenever you put tokens on cards that would give you points, whenever you hit a full point number, you take off those tokens and take a point. You spend those points to go ahead and do that. But you have these ocean tiles that you're flipping over. Well, it has a rule that whenever you flip over these ocean tiles, if you want to flip over the next one, you can kind of look at these and see, which, I mean, ideally you'd have different ocean tiles that had a little image in the back so you can see that, because regular Ares Expedition, when you flip over an ocean tile, you're not supposed to see it. In this one, in the cooperative game, you are supposed to see it. So it has a lot of small little rules, adjustments, or details that make it feel not as elegant as I would like, because it is taking a competitive experience and turning it cooperative. Now, again, that is something that was more of a problem for me after my first game. By the time I hit my second game, I was already fine with those changes. It was already okay. They're still worth addressing and mentioning for sure, but overall, I would say that the experience has gone from feeling a little fiddly to not really having any issues with it once I got used to it. But overall, I really like the Crisis expansion. I talked about it already. It gives a lot of fun things, a lot of new ways to approach the game. It gives me the entire Ares Expedition or Terraforming Mars feeling, but working together with others. It is something, and another pro in its favor, especially as someone who loves Terraforming Mars, it gives me a reason to play this game, another reason to play this game when I want something different than Terraforming Mars. My biggest original critique and disappointment is, why would I play Ares Expedition when I can play Terraforming Mars? For some people, they like Ares Expedition more. I was not one of those people, and am not one of those people. For me, one of those things became the fact that it is shorter, and once I added in some house rules and adjustments, it also improved my experience, and then also it became my go-to for solo play. A longer explanation as to why, I'm not going to get into that for right now, but it became my go-to for solo. Now I have a reason to dive into this with other players as well, because regular Terraforming Mars does not give me a cooperative experience. This one does, and it's a great cooperative experience. As far as my rating for Terraforming Mars and how this affects my overall opinion, this has easily moved Terraforming Mars to Ares Expedition to a 4.5 out of 5 for me, up from a basic 4. This has given me a lot of extra content, a lot of ways to dive into the experience, and a total mind frame adjustment to how I want to dive into it, to how I want to engage, interact, and it does so while being punishingly hard, but also achievable at the same time. And that is everything here. A little all over the place, not my usual review format because of covering 3 expansions, how they relate to a prior game, talking about house rules and different changes and disappointment and adjustments and all those things. A whole lot of stuff, but hopefully you're walking away from this video a little bit more informed about what these expansions bring to the table, how I personally interacted with them as someone who does have a fairly high standard for what I want out of Terraforming Mars, and so hopefully in some way this helped you out. In any case, I'll include a link to the Kickstarter down below. That will be in the description and all of that. And I'll close up this video because I'm all over the place now. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And I hope you have a good one.